that I'll recognize you by name when you're speaking. And if you're participating by video conference, just make sure your microphone is activated. If you're not speaking in the room or on Zoom, keep your microphone away from the earpiece and keep it on mute. We are trying to make sure that we run a safe meeting, and that means making sure that our interpreters don't get feedback. So keeping your earpiece away from the microphone will help us to do that. And again, all questions coming through the chair. And now, pursuant to Standing Order 108.3.1 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, June 6, 2023, the committee resumes its study of the use of federal government research and development grants, funds, and contributions by Canadian universities and research institutions in partnerships with entities connected to the People's Republic of China. And it's my pleasure to welcome to our meeting the Honourable François-Philippe Champagne, Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. We've been looking forward to seeing you, and the day has come. So it's great to have you here. Point of order. And from the Department of Industry, I'll come to that just once I've done the introductions. Francis Bilodeau, Assistant Deputy Minister, and Nipan Vats, Assistant Deputy Minister of Science and Research Sector. We'll go to a point of order, and then you'll have 5 minutes of opening comments.
Yes, Chair, and very grateful to the Minister to be here today. We've asked for an hour. I just want to confirm that he will be here from 3:54 to 4:54.
That's correct. We have the Minister for an hour, and I see no problem from his side. Thank you. And we do have a hard stop at 6, and we've got the second hour with the officials with no opening comments, so we should have plenty of time for questions. But with that, and thank you, Mr. Tucker, we'll go on to the 5-minute opening remarks. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm very happy to be here. Actually, I was one of the first members to show up for the committee, so if you see my level of enthusiasm to come and speak with colleagues on a very, very important topic. And I'm happy, Chair, to add time. I think my remarks are 5 minutes thereabout, but if they're longer, I'm happy to accommodate Mr. Tucker to even stay for 1 or 2 more minutes, depending at the speed I can go through that. Let me just say good afternoon, everyone. Bon après-midi, tout le monde. Merci de
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me here before the committee, one of the most important committees, I believe, for Parliament.
Of this committee again, this time to give you, colleagues, an update on our latest research security policies. Les collaborations avec des chercheurs nationaux et
Collaborations with national and international researchers are essential to ensure that world-class Canadian science and research remains at the forefront of research and innovation. To safeguard Canada's collaborative and open approach to science and discovery, our government continues to protect Canadian research and intellectual property from theft, espionage, and foreign interference.
July 2021. The government launched the National Security Guidelines for Research Partnerships, which has been developed with universities and associations that represent academic institutions across our nation. Under the guidelines, applicants to certain granting agencies program, such as the Alliance program, which is managed by NSERC, must identify possible risk associated with the nature of their proposed research and private sector's partner. To be clear, where the proposed project or partnership presents unmitigable risks, the applicant will be denied funding. Entre juillet 2021
Between July 2021 and March 2023, a total of 1,743 applications for funding were submitted under these guidelines. Of these applications, 36 were rejected due to national security risks, and 110 were rejected for administrative reasons related to the guidelines. However, approximately 92% of all applications submitted under the guidelines did receive funding based on the risk mitigation measures now in place. We want to ensure that we continue supporting science and facilitating research. We do not want to impede Canadian innovation, and our approach must be proportional to the level of risk.
And it allows for new perspectives, increased creativity and innovation, and by adopting a country-agnostic approach, paired with a case-by-case risk assessment process, the government is mitigating the possibility of racial profiling within the research community, while at the same time bolstering Canada's research security policies to account for the threats that originate from anywhere in the world. Our government commitment to research security was further affirmed. Our colleagues will recall that in Budget 2022, which we allocated $160 million to fully implement the guidelines by establishing a Research Security Center of Expertise housed at the Department of Public Safety, and which is providing direct funding to eligible post-secondary institutions to enhance their capacity to identify and mitigate risk. And colleagues, I'm sure would have heard at this committee, this was a demand by the community saying it's good to have guidelines, but you need to put, I would say, resources where you want us to adhere to these guidelines and respect these guidelines. And I think that was a concrete example of us following up on that. To build on this momentum, colleagues will recall that in February 14, 2023, along with the Minister of Public Safety and Health, I directed Canada's research granting agencies and the Canada Foundation for Innovation to take an enhanced security posture. With my colleagues from Public Safety and Health, we have been working diligently to develop a robust implementation of the expanded research security measures, which have been published earlier this year. We have conducted a series of consultations through the University Working Group to determine the best possible approach to protect Canadian research and innovation while maintaining an open and collaborative ecosystem for the benefit of all Canadian researchers. In short, grant applications in sensitive research areas will not be funded if any researcher supported by the grant is either affiliated with or in receipt of funding or in-kind support from a research institution connected to military, national defense, or foreign state security organizations posing a risk to Canada's national security. The detailed parameters of the policy will be published soon to ensure researchers have the guidance needed to prepare grant applications in a way that ensures the security of research on sensitive technologies.
5 minutes, so
Okay. I had a lot of interesting things to add to that, Mr. Chair, but since you're the boss, I will stop there and I'll happily take questions from colleagues.
well, thank you. We've got 5 minutes of your testimony, and the rest maybe we can work in through the question rounds. And we'll be starting the first round with Michael Cooper, who's substituting for Gerald Soroka, and welcome. Also, we have Rick Perkins substituting for Michelle Rempel-Garner. So, Mr. Cooper, you've got 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Minister. For years, CSIS has publicly warned that Beijing is threatening Canada's national security and intellectual property in 5 sensitive areas of research and development. Despite these warnings, your government, including through granting councils that fall under your purview as minister, have funded research partnerships with Beijing in the 5 sensitive areas identified by CSIS, as well as with scientists connected to Beijing's military and intelligence apparatuses. Canadians deserve to know how many such projects have been funded by your government.
I would say, Mr. Cooper, first of all, it's nice to see you again, sir. You seem to be following me from committee to committee. So it's a pleasure to see you. I would say, just for Canadians who are watching, I just want to say it's a bit rich to look at our government for that. You will recall that we're the first government starting in 2018 to really look at research security. You know, our work started in 2018 to really
Minister, with respect,
make
I asked
sure
you very specifically how many projects have been funded, just a number.
Well,
please.
I will tell you how many projects have not been funded. You can see.
That wasn't the question. The question
No,
was
but
how many projects
I'm providing an
were
answer
funded.
to you. So I can tell you since we implemented the enhanced security protocol, I would say the guidelines that have been put in place have been making sure that we protect the national security of Canadian institutions.
Minister,
and I will
since you
say,
won't answer, since you will not answer
Point of order.
my question,
Mr. Turnbull?
I totally respect Mr. Cooper's time, and I understand, but cutting the witness off when they're trying to answer his question is not abiding by, I think, the normal informal ways in which we operate in this committee. I would just ask you, Chair, if you wouldn't
Thanks.
mind maybe reminding Mr. Cooper of how we operate here.
Thanks, Mr. Turnbull, and to the Minister and Mr. Cooper, if we can get the questions and answers in a timely fashion so we can continue on. I've paused you, and you've got 4 minutes and 9 seconds.
Waiting for an answer. How many projects have been funded?
I would say I'm happy to defer to the official if you want the exact number of projects. But what I can say to you, Mr. Cooper, is that protecting Canadian research is a top priority. What I was explaining to you and Canadians who are watching at home today is that since 2018 we have taken a number of measures, and I would say
it's such a
we are the
priority.
first government
You
to
can't
be
give
taking
a
steps
number.
to make sure
You've
that
not
we
given
have
me a number.
research security
you
in
didn't
Canada.
answer a straightforward question. And frankly, if this is such a priority for you and then your government, why is it that weeks ago we learned that there have been new patent applications published listed Huawei as an owner with Canadian university researchers as inventors? In other words, Canadian universities are still very actively in collaboration with the likes of Huawei, despite the fact that 5G is identified as one of the 5 areas of sensitive research. Minister, obviously your guidelines that you cite are not working.
Well, I would say with respect, sir, I'm the one who issued the directive to the market not to have Huawei and ZTE in telecommunication in Canada. So you're talking to the guy who made it happen. So you're not talking to some random person. You're talking to the person who made it happen in Canada. What I can tell you, and since June 2021, there's been no federal grant to Huawei. And what we did, Mr. Cooper, which I think Canadians need to understand, we set the tone, because since then, you will have seen, because I know you're a well-informed member of Parliament, that a number of universities, but just for the record, as they're watching today, the University of Toronto, the University of Waterloo, McMaster University, Queen's University, University of British Columbia, and Western University have all adhered to our principle and stop any collaboration with Huawei. That's part of the public record.
You have the power as minister to issue a ministerial directive banning federal granting councils from funding research partnerships with Beijing in the 5 sensitive research areas identified by CSIS. Why have you failed to do that?
Well, I would say, sir, we've done more than that. We have issued guidelines to make sure that, our programs, sir, but if you want an answer, sir, I appreciate
guidelines.
If I can just, Mr. Cooper,
in my answer, because you asked me a question. If you want me to answer, sir, I'm more than happy. That's why I
If we could direct the
appeared
questions
here.
and answers through the chair, as we said at the beginning, so that we don't get back into this back and forth and talking over each other, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Minister, guidelines that have resulted in ongoing collaboration between universities and Huawei, despite the fact that 5G is identified as one of these sensitive research areas, guidelines that have resulted in ongoing collaboration with Beijing's National University of Defense Technology, which has been blacklisted in the U.S. since 2015 because it was deemed by the U.S. to be a national security risk. And you're saying here before this committee that your guidelines are working. Minister, are you serious?
More than serious, sir. I made sure that they would work. Like I said, for the record, sir, and you should look at the facts. Since June 2021, there's been no federal grant. But one thing you need to know, but just take a moment. We're not at question period here. Just take a moment to listen to my answer. What I'm saying to you, sir, with respect, is that not only we did that, but you have to appreciate that we set the tone, and now we've seen universities and provinces acting again, because my role as the federal minister is to set the principle. And I would challenge you that in the Five Eyes, sirs, we are among the best when it comes to that, because we actually work with our Five Eyes partner
I would submit
to put
your
these lists.
guidelines are working very well for Beijing. They're not working well when it comes to protecting Canada's national security interests.
Sir, I would say with respect, I think the number of experts in the field would disagree with your assessment, but I respect your view, sir. And I can tell you my mission and my commitment to Canadians. And I have been on the record, sir, to be the minister who have denied a number of acquisitions that the government or entity related to the Chinese government were to make in Canada. I'm the one who defended our national security by making sure that there would be no Huawei and ZTE equipment in Canada's telecom infrastructure and 5G. Sir, you're looking at the person in front of you has made sure that we would protect national security at every step of the way.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions and answers. And now we turn over to Valerie Bradford for 6 minutes, please.
Mr. Minister and the other witnesses for joining us today. We really look forward to your testimony. Minister, can you tell us about the importance of the independence of research?
Well, I mean, one of the things is that, and I think even our colleagues from the conservative bench would agree that academic freedom and institutional freedom is essential in Canada. And I think the guidelines we need to have is that, which have, our research need to be as open as possible and as secure as necessary. That is really the framework we need to operate because, not only we look at what we do in Canada, but with respect to my colleagues, we're looking at what the Five Eyes are doing to make sure that at the same time that we protect our research, which is key. We want to protect the data, we want to protect the IP, we want to protect the knowledge. We also want to have I would say, a research environment in Canada which is conducive to the work that researchers do, which is, learning and sharing knowledge and making sure they can work collaboratively with different partners around the world to advance science. I mean, which is the mutual interest of the researchers. So I would say that our job is to identify and mitigate the risk, but at the same time, I think that Canadians would be happy to see that we respect academic freedom and the autonomy of institutions. And like I said to colleagues before, the federal government has a role to play, and I'm very happy to play it with you in part of this committee. But as we know, the research ecosystem is much broader than just the federal government, which has influence to the granting agencies. Provinces have a role to play. Academic institutions have a role to play. Researchers have a role to play. It's a whole ecosystem that we're trying to be open to make sure that we lead in science as we have always done in key areas. Mr. Cooper was mentioning AI, quantum, I can go on in space. I mean, we're leading, but at the same time, we need to engage with eyes wide open. And I can tell you that this is really the framework, is to have a balance which put the national security and economic security of Canada first. And that's what I've been trying to do. And we've done three things which I think are quite consequential. And I think it was rich from my colleagues to criticize this government in any way, because we really started in this country in 2018 to look at this issue. No government before had really looked into that. Not only we came with the national guidelines, we then put, we need to put money in the Research Security Center, and now we have an enhanced posture that I've announced at the beginning of this year, and we're going to come soon with further guidelines and lists to make sure that we provide tools, because what institutions have been asking, they say, Minister, we hear you, we understand what you want to do, we know that this is what we need to do, give us tools. So we're going to come with a list of institutions and a list of research area where, if they were to engage in that, with entities that would be on these lists, that funding would be denied. That's the role that we can play as leadership, making sure that we use all tools that we have available federally, but at the same time, as you said, embrace the whole community to make sure that they go with us in this journey of securing our research in the country.
So what's the timeline then on these lists and these enhanced guidelines? When do you anticipate?
Well, very soon. I would say we've been working with our security partners, because when you go in lists, because we have decided to have, a country and company agnostic approach when we put the guidelines initially. Because I would say to my colleagues, they've been focusing on one country, but for the record, I mean, threats can come from everywhere at any time. Let's be honest. This is a world which, in terms of geopolitics, has been changing quite rapidly. So when you're looking at risk, they come from all different sources now. To your point, what we've been working with our intelligence agencies is to make sure that we are as specific as one can be, because, we want our researcher to do research. We don't want them to spend an unreasonable amount of time on filling, forms to make sure that they comply with rules. But at the same time, I would say these lists are forthcoming. They'll come very soon, and I think we've been working with Universities Canada, the U15, and also to the University and Government of Canada Working Group. None of what we did has been done, I would say, in standalone. We work in partnership. And to the question of my colleague, Mr. Cooper, before, the rules that we've put in place have been well thought through with experts, with Universities Canada, with the U15, with our Five Eyes partner, to make sure that we work, because people realize that, if you have malicious actor, it's not only good that we protect in Canada, we need to do that as Five Eyes, because they're going to migrate to other jurisdictions. So we're very well aligned with the Five Eyes partner to make sure we're best in class.
So can you maybe elaborate, you did talk about threats can come from anywhere. How have the threats to international security through research partnership evolved over the last 10 to 20 years? You said we only started worrying about it in 2018.
Well, in 2018, I would say our government started to take action. And like I said, this was really the moment where we saw that the community was coming together to make sure we do better. That's why I thought it was a bit rich to criticize our government for that, because it was not done by the previous government. But that being said, I think that the threat level has increased. I mean, we've seen regional conflicts operating. We've seen malicious actor with respect to, trying to enter our networks. We've seen example which are well documented in the press of the kind of threat. And like I said, it's not only people trying to get our knowledge, but what I'm very focused on is people trying to get our data and eventually our IP. So we need to protect that in a way and providing the tools to the institution. That's why, for me, the $160 million we put in the Canada Research Security Center was key, because that provided funding to about 50 institutions across Canada, because they said, Minister, we understand the guidelines, we want to follow them, but we need resources, because, you know what, this is complex work. And so I think that we have done everything we could.
Okay.
And we'll continue to do that. And the list, like I said, of entities and research areas is going to be forthcoming.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. And thank you for the questions. Now to Maxime Blanchet-Choca for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And hello, Minister. Thank you for being with us. It's a pleasure to have you. Minister, this is an important meeting today about the national security and research. In February, you announced that you would be coming out with guidelines, and you have a plan. Normally in plans, there's a kind of deadlines and dates. What you're telling us now is there is no date in your plan. I've put questions to everyone who's been before us here in the committee, the chairs of the 3 granting agencies, chairs of presidents of public funding groups, and so on. What I'm looking for is the guidelines. And other ministers, Madame Pascale Derry, the minister, provincial minister of Quebec of Education, says that we're waiting for the feds to come out with their guidelines. And I asked Mr. Champagne about this, Minister Champagne, and I haven't gotten any answer. That's what she said in May. We need directives in order to be able to know what to do to define a specific policy to go ahead in the right way. We need specific guidelines. It's a matter of national security. So my question, Minister, is as follows. In February, you said you were coming out with these guidelines, supposedly involving a list of risky organizations, high-risk organizations to avoid. That was in February. 9 months later, in November, tell us when this list will become available so that people who are waiting for the guidelines will be able to use them. Excellent question, Chair. 20th of November, 2023. I'm saying that it will be coming soon, and you've got today's date for that statement. Of course, Quebec is a leader in so many areas, and I enjoy working with Ms. Derry. I think that behind your question, you've got the why as well as the when. It's a complex matter coming up with specific entities and a list that's well thought through. I have to applaud my team and also our officials and the national security teams who have been working with the Five Eyes in order to draw up as complete a list as possible, because you understand, when we list an entity, this is a considerable matter. Canada will be one of the only entities, perhaps the only one in the world, that will have such a list with specific names on it. So this work must be done correctly. We expect this list to be amendable and changeable as we go ahead, but we want it to last. We want it to be a good list. So we're working a good deal with security groups throughout the country. So everyone understand here on the 20th of November, you're not ready to show us the list. I said in English, it will come soon. So in prochainement, I think is how I would put it in French. So on the 20th of November, you're saying soon there will be a list. Okay, that's good. That's not a date. It's just your word, a date with my comment. All right. So accessing this list, when people want to consult the list, when will they be able to do so? Look, I've said soon. But look, I'm on your side. And by the way, I want to applaud you for your work, exceptional work. I want the list too, and as quickly as possible. But that as a minister, of course, in a complex matter such as this involving national security, yes, we want to go quickly, but we want to do this right. And you have to combine those two factors because, of course, I can push the agencies to move faster on this. But look, I am saying the list will come out very soon, and we'll be in a position to publish it, to make it public. Why has it taken time? Well, I think that people can rest assured that the security agents and agencies that we have worked with their colleagues in other countries, if you wish, to ensure that we get the best list possible. This is a groundbreaking approach. No one else has this list. Thank you for these details, and we'll look forward to seeing the list. Let me insist on the fact that the guidelines so far are unclear, and that this makes it difficult to ensure that our national security is tight and coordinated. Let me give you an example. In Quebec, there's a subcommittee on a working group discussing this at the Inter-University Cooperation Group, which is, all the universities get together. Everyone's waiting for that. But other provinces are going ahead. In Alberta, the Minister of Education ordered all universities there to suspend all partnerships with Chinese universities. And then in Ontario, there was an announcement somewhat similar. What we are waiting for, Minister, is leadership from you. We want clear directives, clear guidelines. Right now, people are waiting in the dark. It's a gray situation. I hope you understand how important it is to move ahead quickly. Yes, leadership from Ottawa. As you say, all the provincial ministers are referring to what Ottawa's doing. And the leadership got underway when we launched our 2021 July directives for national research, and that was worked up with the scientific community. We work closely with that community. We have also provided tools and funding, and we are working with our partners. I'm really happy that the provinces are on this because, of course, a federal jurisdiction allows us to fund research, but the provinces have such an important role here, so do universities, and so do the actual scientists. We need to respect that ecosystem and work with it. But as you say, I hear that message, continue to lead, and that's exactly what we'll continue doing. Thank you.
Thank you. And over to Richard Kennings, please. 6 minutes.
Thank you. And I'm going to thank you, Minister, for being here today. And I'm going to kind of follow up on what Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca was pressing on. You spoke at the start about the number of funding applications that had been rejected because of concerns. But I think a more serious concern from Canadians would be, the fact is that most research in Canada is not funded by the tri-councils, or there's a tremendous amount that is not. And it's that research that is of most concern, I think, because there's a considerable concern that research in many cases is funded by outside sources, some cases by other countries. And I'm just wondering, we hear of stories of researchers that are caught sending trade secrets or industry secrets to China. There's one from Hydro-Quebec a year ago. What is the federal government doing to prevent those things from happening when there's so much pressure on researchers here, students coming in from other countries to be funded from outside, and they get kind of entrapped by this and really forced to send these results back, send things that really belong here. And I'll just leave it there, but I want to follow up with a question about why we're in that position. Why do we not fund our own research as much? But I just want to, first of all, what is the federal government doing to go after those situations where people are getting external funding?
Well, first of all, you raised a very interesting point, as always, Mr. Canning. I mean, the federal government, I have a role of leadership, and I think that's the primary role, to set the tone. And that's why the guidelines have been the first moment in Canada where we have now a framework, then we have a research security center, we have enhanced security posture, we're going to come with a list. But you're right, not all the research in Canada is funded to federal grants, where we have a direct way of influencing. What we've been doing is demanding and working with Universities Canada, the U15, and the Government of Canada and University Working Group to say, listen, we're all in this together. This is a nationwide effort. This is about national security. I may not have all the tools under the Constitution to force you, but I think, as your colleague said before, people expect us to put the framework. I think that's what we've done, and the list is going to be of great help. And you're quite right. I mean, we want the research to be as open as possible, but as secure as necessary. And to your point, I was very pleased, and I insisted when I saw universities, and I quoted that to your colleagues before, that have voluntarily said that, for example, with Huawei, that they would cease any partnership they had with them. There's many ways to fund research in Canada. I think the government of Canada is doing its fair share on that. The provinces are there as well. But we need to make sure that we protect our research. And I would say, and I'll finish there, it's not only the research, but I want to draw the attention of the committee to the data. We need to protect our data sets as well, and the IP that comes out of that.
Okay.
And that's why the ICA, I just want to say I'm pleased that the House voted on that, because the ICA is going to give us more tools. We've worked with Mr. Perkins on that, to have more tools in the law to protect our IP when it comes to national security.
I just want to jump in and say, we are at the bottom of various lists of countries in terms of how much money the federal government puts into research. There's been a lot of suggestions out there from the Bouchard report that we should dramatically increase that funding, and this would ameliorate the situation. This would stop researchers and students from going elsewhere for funding, or even going elsewhere, period. I have someone got in touch with me yesterday about their son who ended up going to Vienna for university because he had a scholarship that was worth twice as much as what NSERC would give him. He ended up going to Barcelona for a postdoc because they offered him twice as much what Canada would. This is the funding draw that both researchers and students are finding, and it would go a long way, I think, to stopping this flow of people going elsewhere, the research going elsewhere, that should be staying here in Canada.
No, I hear you loud and clear, and for all the students and researchers and professors which are watching today, listen, I understand. I hear you loud and clear. We have always led when it comes to research and science in this country, and I agree with you. Funding is a key component of that. We always rank very top of the list, but obviously we've seen over the years kind of sliding back. We made the largest investment in science of, I would say, about any government when we came to office. But obviously people would say, well, if you want to keep the high ranking, you need to keep investing in science and research. And I can tell you that we're very, very cognizant of that, and are trying to look at every possible way how we can support our students, our scientists, and our researchers, because the work of this committee has highlighted that. The Bouchard report, and I want to personally thank Professor Bouchard for his work, has been key in making sure that we understand really the state of science and what we can do to support our young scientists and research in Canada, both fundamental and applied research.
Well, I'll come back to you when I have my next round, but I would come back to you and say that we don't rank very high when it comes to that federal government funding, and it's causing real serious problems. And
we can do better.
Okay, thank you. We'll leave that for the next round, which will be starting now. 5 minutes for Mr. Tucker. I understand you're sharing your time with Mr. Perkins.
Correct. Earlier on in this study, Minister, that we heard from experts from the Royal Military College that starting in roughly in 2017, that the PRC activities started to pose an existential threat. Do you agree with them, yes or no?
I have not seen the report, so I'll let them speak for themselves.
Just do you view PRC's activities as an existential threat to Canada, yes or no?
I would let the report stand for itself. That I think that the
That's
report I have
troubling,
not
Minister,
seen
that
stand
you
for
do
itself.
not view the PRC's activities
I would
as an
rather read the report
existential
before I
threat
comment on
to our
reports.
country. You say that you've been trying to improve things since 2018 on this front, so it's been 5 years. Institutions are waiting for this list. In February of this year, you said that it would be coming out soon. We are now in November, Minister, and you've said it's coming out soon. Whose ministry would be in charge of releasing that list?
It's a joint effort, sir. As you would appreciate, It's not the Ministry of Industry which is drawing that. It's a number of federal agencies, intelligence agencies, and not only Canadian, but this is a Five Eyes effort that we're doing with our allied partner to make sure that the list is going to serve as a benchmark, not only for Canada, but I would say
Minister,
for the
we
Five
need
Eyes
that
countries.
list. Minister, right now we have the full application of funding passed. There is groups and identities tied to the PRC that your ministry is going to be funding because you have not released this list. How is this acceptable?
I would disagree with you because we provided the guidelines. What we're looking at now is a very specific list. And, sir, if
Minister,
I may
one
again,
last question.
Yeah.
Is it hard to make lists?
I would say it's not hard to make a list, but it's hard to make the right list when you talk about national
I'm going to pass
security.
my time to
and,
my colleague, Greg
making sure
Perkins.
that it's the right list.
Thank you. We've gone through that a couple of times now. Mr. Perkins,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
about 2 minutes.
So, Minister, if I heard you right earlier, you said that the government started to take this issue seriously around 2018. Is that correct?
Well, certainly
Just
we
a
came
yes
in
or no.
office in 2015, and I would say when I look at the list of actions that have
Well,
been
I'm
taken
not
with
looking
the
for the
first
list. I'm just
government.
looking, you said 2018 was your testimony. Are you aware that in 2015, the National University of Defense Technology, which is the research and development arm of the Chinese government for the Chinese military, was banned and blacklisted in the United States by Barack Obama?
If you say so, Mr. Perkins, I always say
So
what
obviously you're not aware of that.
What you're saying
So
as
I
being
guess
the
you
record.
haven't been paying that much attention to it if you're not aware that
Sir, with
almost
respect,
9
the
years ago.
previous
No,
conservative government has done nothing, sir. I won't take any lesson
If
from
I could
you on that.
interject as the chair, let's try not to talk over the person answering, and let's try not to talk over the person questioning. Please give each other some respect and some time to answer your questions and ask questions. Thank you.
So your answer indicated that you weren't aware, or you would have said yes. So over the past 5 years, the National University of Defense Technology, you've said since 2018 you've been paying attention, has done 240 joint papers and research projects with Canadian universities. Doesn't sound like your government was taking it very seriously.
I don't know why that, what's the question in a sense, sir? We've been the ones who have been, the previous conservative government has done nothing, so I'll take no lessons. What I can say to you is that our government is the government which has put the security guidelines in place. And don't take it from me, Mr. Perkins, take it from the experts. The experts would tell you that they would say, Minister, they came to see me. The expert would say, Minister, thanks for what you've been doing. You've been putting the security
Well, I'd like,
front
can you
and center.
table a list of those experts that have complimented you? Thank you. I'd appreciate that. Also, can you tell me if you have actually banned, which the United States, which President Barack Obama did in 2015, have you banned the National University of Defense Technology from doing research in Canada?
I would say we've done more than that. We have issued
No, that's
guidelines
a yes or no.
that would cover. No, but sir, that's an answer. We've done more than that.
Have you banned them?
We have done
No,
more
but
than that.
that's not
We
my
have-
question. My
But
question
no,
was,
but
have
that's
you
my
banned them?
answer. We have more. We have done more than that because it's country and company agnostic and organization agnostic.
But you
Why?
have not- so
Because
you
that's
have-
the smart thing to do, Mr. Perkins.
But you have not banned them. Have you banned Huawei from doing research in Canada since they still have patents pending and research going on in Canada?
Better than that, sir. I have banned them to be from infrastructure network in Canada.
You haven't banned them from
That's
research,
even better.
though. You have not banned them from
What
research.
we have done, sir, it's even better. We have
So you've
provided a
not
framework
banned
that
the
would
Chinese
capture
government
Huawei,
from
sir.
doing research in Canadian
No,
universities.
but we've done more than that, sir. We've done more than that.
No,
That's
you
what
haven't,
is
because you haven't
interesting.
banned China from doing
Look,
research.
If you look at even the university
Guidelines are
have
not
decided,
banning individual companies. Why
what I'm
won't you
saying
ban
is
those
that
companies?
it's even better because
That's
we have
the end
framework.
of 5 minutes. I feel like I need a bell here. And now over to Ms. Jacek, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister Champagne and the officials for being here today. I think you've made it very clear, actually, that in your opening remarks that protecting our researchers and institutions from foreign state actors that threaten our national security is your top priority. And I see you nodding, so you would clearly agree. So you have established a working group to develop national security guidelines. Now, we did hear at this committee some criticism about this working group, that in fact it was not consulting broadly enough. In fact, it failed to include domain experts who understand IP, national security, etc. Could you reassure for us who exactly is working on the security guidelines? Because you've alluded to the fact that, in fact, it's been a very broad consultation. So could you, for the record, tell us exactly who is involved?
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Jasek, for the question, because, in fact, we've been working a lot. We've been working with the U15, and we've been working also with Universities Canada. But more than that, to answer to the colleagues before and some of the criticism, we have created what they call the Government of Canada and the Universities Working Group. Why? Because we want to make sure that what we put is something that would be fit for purpose, that we work collaboratively with universities, with experts, with intelligence agencies to make sure. And I would say we've consulted broadly. When you talk to universities presidents, when you're talking to association, they would say they welcome what we've done, because for the first time, despite what the Conservatives may say, for the first time in Canada's history, since 2021, now you have national security guidelines, something that the previous government failed to do. Now there is something. And this was a first in Canada. They should be applauding. They say, thanks God, someone has been doing something to make sure that we have a national security guidelines in Canada. And not only we did that, but to your point, we put $160 million to put a research security center. Why? Because the university said, Minister, help us. It's complex. It's very complex out there. We need resources. We need people. We said we're going to do that. And then this year we said we're going to have an enhanced security posture. It's going to apply to all the granting agencies. And we're going to come with lists to making sure that it's going to be easy for you, for the researchers, to be able to identify whether or not that's a partnership they should pursue. I would say if you look at the Five Eyes, which we're working with, and our colleagues around the world, they would tell you that Canada, with the framework we have, the list that we're going to be publishing, we're going to be best in class.
And could you just describe a little bit more about this Research Security Centre that is housed within Public Safety Canada? What exactly is their role? How do they assist universities in looking at grant applications? And have they been doing that? You referenced a number have been rejected. Was this a result of consultation with this Research Security Centre?
Well, there's three missions. The money that we've provided to, it's about 50 institutions around the country. It's around hiring personnel, getting the software needed, and making sure that they could have the proper cybersecurity infrastructure in place. So this is really about hands-on type of support because, when we launched these guidelines, this was a pilot in Canada. This has not been done before. So what came out of it is that we need more tools, more resources to make sure that we can properly assess that. And I would say what we're going to be publishing soon, the list that are going to be following Annex A and B that you find in the guidelines, they're going to be more specific than that. These are going to be really, I would say, hands-on, to the question of the colleagues before. To draw these lists, it's fairly complex because now you're going to identify by name institutions that people should be worried about if they were to engage in certain type of research. So that, in my view, is kind of best in class because, like I said, research security is top of mind because one of the key assets we have in Canada is, like I said, our knowledge, our data set, and our IP. And I think the framework that we've put, starting with the security guidelines we put, is really kind of the umbrella, and then we're declining that with very specific tools to help institutions in the country.
And will the lists be informed by the fact that certain grant applications were refused? Will there be an assessment of what the proposal was and if it was affiliated with a foreign institution? Will that lead to, in fact, composing the list? I mean, that information could be very, very useful.
Totally. And that's why the criticism that was done before, I think I'll defend the security agencies and I'll defend the civil service. They've been doing extremely diligent work. I would say to colleagues, be careful of criticizing people who are doing extremely complex work for having been aware of some of the work. Even our Five Eyes partner would say it's very complex as you do that because you want to capture the right entity, you want to capture to make it as current as possible.
Okay.
And this is very detailed work, but I think it's going to be welcomed by institutions and researchers in our country.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both. And Mr. Blanchet-Joquin for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Écoutez, Monsieur le
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I know that you're being put some difficult questions. I'd put an easy one for you. Would you like to name one thing that the price has not changed on for 20 years? Well, I'm sure you'll give me a magnificent answer that you've been thinking through for weeks now. We only have a few seconds, but the federal government graduate study grants, that the price, the amount given hasn't changed for 20 years, and this leads to some very serious consequences. Canada is the only G7 country that hasn't increased its number of researchers since 2016. $17,500 for a master's, and then $2,000, not much more for a doctoral student. So I'm trying to see what the problem is, because there's a unanimous consensus in the scientific community, representatives of universities, that this should change. What are you going to do? Two things. First, and I think that people in the science ecosystem will say that we're among the greatest investors in science in country right now, the federal government, and then should we increase the amounts? That's why with my colleagues we're looking over the various programs, how to help research, how to help scientists and students. We've done things. We'll continue to do things. If we want to remain in the front of the pack, we need to do more. Yes, I agree. That's why, as I say, we are working with colleagues to see what we can continue to do to support, to add to what's going on. And the Bouchard report has been very helpful in this regard. Good. I hope we'll get good news as of tomorrow with the new financial announcements. We'll hear about something more for graduate students. Now, there is the report on the federal research funding. Now, there's the report, I've got it right here. There's something quite important I'd like to underscore. Yes, there's a call to create a new committee, strike up a new committee to improve coordination among granting agencies. The support, as I mentioned, for graduate students, master's and doctorate, and also measures to support university studies in French. But there's also something announced here, and I'd like to know, 2023, we're already well into it. And in this report, there was a request to create new agencies, the Canadian Science Fund, and to support that sort of agency. So I'd like you to tell us what the plan is and when this will happen.
Je vais prendre une réponse écrite, Monsieur le ministre, avec plaisir.
Written answer, if you don't mind, Minister. I'll be right in the hallway to speak to you.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Mr. Cannings for 2.5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, and I'm going to follow up and ask almost exactly the same question in English that Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca just asked, and that is, I think it's just a shameful situation we're in where the Tri-Council fellowships and scholarships haven't changed in value for 20 years. We have master students who are asked to live on $17,500 a year. That includes their tuition, which averages about $7,000. So they're asked to live on for $10,000 a year. They're living below the poverty line. These aren't just average students. These are the best students, the best and brightest. I gave the example of someone who went to Europe because the European Union was offering twice what Canada is offering. And this is not only shameful, I think, for how Canada treats its science and research ecosystem. You talked about how important that was, that we help nurture science and research in Canada, but it touches on this security issues as well. And I'm just wondering, with the fall economic statement tomorrow, will there be news with that regard, even especially for this low-hanging fruit of these scholarships and fellowships?
I say, Mr. Cannings, you've been consistent and referring to that. Like I said, I hear the students, for those who are watching, the teacher, the researcher, I want to thank them. I am fully aware of the issue. I understand the question before as well. That's certainly something, like you said, we've been the government who's been investing the most in science, but to keep our leading position, we need to keep investing. And I hear that, and I've heard stories, I've met with students. Trust me, if there's one thing which is top of mind for me is how we can help these students, how we can help the researchers, because, the research of today is tomorrow's economy. And I'm very conscious of that. And whatever we can do to support them, I can assure you, sir, that those are active discussions to see how we can support them.
And 30 seconds. Well, you just mentioned, Dr. Bouchard's report. You commissioned that report. He's saying the same thing. And when I've talked to him personally, he expresses concerned that this hasn't been acted on. You know, there hasn't been any increase to those fellowships and scholarships, and the increases to the actual research grants themselves, which help fund even more students. You know, we are really losing out here. We are falling behind, and I just hope there's some good news soon.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cannings. And now we'll go to Mr. Lobb for 2.5 minutes, and then we'll go to the Liberals for 2.5 minutes.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. First question is, it's in regards to the Research Support Fund. Okay, that's the $25 million a year program for 5 years. Has there been any decisions made on this calendar year if anybody should receive that money, and if so, how much has been allocated?
That's a good question. Let me turn to one of my officials. I don't have the detail of that, sir. Nipun?
Just ask for a written.
Okay.
The Research Support Fund is provided to institutions on the basis of a formula. So basically,
Okay, maybe if you have allocated some, you could submit it to the committee for the purposes of the report. My second question is for the minister again. It is in regards to the assessment form, okay? Somebody inside the university that's doing the research fills it out. Who looks at it? And who verifies that the information? Because it looks to me, every single project should be filled out by somebody at a university based on the criteria.
Yeah, well, the researcher would do that, but we also have a system of
Who
audit.
looks at it, though?
Sorry?
Who would look at the form once it's filled out to decide whether or not it needs to be further reviewed?
Per institution, you mean? Or
Correct. Per application, per institution.
I'm happy to have the official answer that, sir.
yeah, under the current guidelines, the way it works is that the institution first reviews
I understand
what
that,
a
but
researcher does.
Okay,
It
and
then
then-
goes to the granting council, goes to NSERC. NSERC then assesses it based on the information that's been reported, and if they see that there is a potential security risk associated with a project, it's then referred to.
Can I ask one quick question? What particular training would they have to give them that level of knowledge to know that without
So-
help from the RCMP or CSIS or the military?
So they've worked actually very closely with the security agencies on that sort of initial stage of assessment to be able to identify where there are some potential risks. And if they feel that there may be a risk, they would then refer it for a more detailed review by the security
Is
agencies.
there a fine or a charge if it's filled out, if the form is filled out incorrectly? Would the researcher, if they filled it out intently, if they filled it out incorrectly, is there a charge or a fine for anybody that tries to mislead?
Well, there are institutional agreements. So the institution is endorsing these.
No criminal charges if you filled it out wrong.
Well, I mean, if they broke the law, then yes, there'd be a criminal charge. In this case, there's a code of responsible conduct of research that institutions agree to with the granting councils. And if they violate the terms of that, there can be sanctions on institutions with respect to the receipt of funding for research.
Great, thanks. It's good to get that out there. Now to Ms. Medlej-Diab for the final 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Minister, welcome. Thank you for being here bright and early for our committee. Let me just start by saying that I'm glad to hear your response to my colleagues across the way that helping students and researchers is top of mind. We had a number of studies here and a number that have been with us, and I think all of us understand the challenges that they're facing, and I'm glad to hear that that's top of mind, not just for science, but all graduate students in a different than science. I want to ask a question, though. Can you talk to the committee more about how your department is working with the allies on multi-country dialogue and how this supports increased security for research?
Yep.
And give you an opportunity with whatever minute I may have left to conclude with whatever you think you would like to also share with us.
You do have about a minute.
A minute. Thank you very much for the question. And in fact, I think just to go back to the question of the colleague, why you need a proper process to draw these lists, I think you touched on it. This is not just a Canadian-made list. This is a list which has been worked with our Five Eyes allies to make sure this will be the benchmark that you're going to see. So I want to take the opportunity to thank all those who contributed. Colleagues have been fair in mentioning there's a number of intelligence agencies in Canada that have been contributing. because that is a fairly complex work. I know there's politics in these committees, but let's be clear. When you're talking national security, this is very serious stuff. This is not about politics. This is about people who put names of institution on the list which will have legal consequences. This is really, really serious, and you don't want to miss anyone. And you want to put the right ones there. So this work has been done diligently. Like I said, that's why we're going to come and publish that soon, both on the research side and on the entity side, to make sure that we protect our national security. But to your point, I think that the fact that we work with our Five Eyes partners should give comfort to our colleagues on both sides of the aisle that this is serious stuff, that I would say protecting Canadian research is our top priority. And the fact that we took time to do that should also give comfort to the research institution and Canadians that this is serious work that we undertake seriously to protect our national security for decades to come.
Well, that's terrific. Thank you, Minister. Thank you for coming early and staying late.
Point of order.
And we're just going to excuse you. Because
Point of order before the minister goes.
Sure.
Chair, we cannot conclude this report without the material that the minister is committed to. I just want to make sure the minister, very clear the expectation that we will receive a list from you of the many experts that agree with your position of the government. We know the minister is having difficulties making lists, so I just want to make clear that we will have that list of all the experts.
Yeah, so that's the next thing on my agenda is, as we're excusing you, that we've asked for some written information that can come in through the clerk, and we do have some operating principles there in terms of how the committee expects responses in a timely fashion, and if those can come in. This is our last meeting of this study, or the second last meeting of this study, and so getting the answers in would be very important. So with that, we'll suspend, we'll let the minister go, and we've heard from Mr. Vatz a little bit, and we'll hear from Mr. Bilodeau as well in the second hour. Thank you very much. And thank the officials for being with us pursuant to Standing Order 10831 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, June 6, 2023. The committee resumes its study of the use of federal government research and development grants, funds, and contributions by Canadian universities and research institutions in partnership with entities connected to the People's Republic of China. So again, it's my pleasure to welcome from the Department of Industry, Francis Bilodeau, Associate Deputy Minister, and Nipon Vatz, the Assistant Deputy Minister for Science and Research Sector. So we are going to continue on with questions. We've had the presentation from the Minister at the beginning, and so we'll go to the first person for 6 minutes, which is Ben Lobb. You're up.
I'll share my time with Mr. Tucker. And my first question is, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Tucker. Filling out that assessment form, there's a number of criteria. Food is one of them in the criteria. Say, for example, a state-owned enterprise like Syngenta. Okay, Syngenta is an international agriculture, mega company. You'd have to check the box that it is a state-owned enterprise or state-controlled, whatever, and that it was food, And if you look under some of the things that they do, I think it's a fine company, but biosecurity, biohealth, there's a lot of different pathogens that can happen inside a livestock barn. There's all sorts of different things that can happen. So would a company like Syngenta be eligible for a project? How would that work? Who vets it? Who determines? How would you know?
Sure.
Real world question.
No, I guess the starting point is not necessarily speaking to that company. I mean, the forms, as you've mentioned, would be filled out by the researchers. They'd be asked to identify a series of pieces of information, including their partners. But the point on this one is that it's intended to be project by project or initiative by initiative assessment. And so in this instance, there could, for example, be flags that would push the NSERC folks to take a deeper look at it, to seek input. If they were really concerned about it, as Nippon mentioned before, it would actually be reviewed by some of our security agencies who might look deeper into this. But the fact that it is on a case-by-case, initiative-by-initiative, actually allows us to weigh the risks with regards to
just
individuals.
one quick follow-up, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Tucker. So if you were state-owned, there's a chance that you could be allowed, Chinese PRC state-owned enterprise, you would be allowed to have a research application approved then, based on case-by-case with what you just said?
So, again, if you're a state-owned enterprise and you are in an area of potentially sensitive research, I don't believe that would be the case.
I think it depends on what the nature of the research is. Like if there's a risk associated with the research, risk of exfiltration of sensitive data, for example, or when it comes to pathogens, there would be other biosecurity measures and limited access as well, which would be, we have rules around that as well, but it would just depend on the specifics of a project.
Thank you.
And Mr. Tucker.
Yes, and to our witnesses, thank you for the public service that you guys do, the important work that you do. Very much appreciated. Just going to follow up when my colleague Ben Lobb was talking about once the application comes in and you have someone have a look over it. I would assume that you would look over a lot of these applications. Would you have a list internally? Maybe not public yet, but internally. Is there a list that you can, it's easy to say, okay, yeah, we saw this one before, scratch it.
So maybe I'll mention two things. I mean, part of the intent in creating a research security center and funding it within public safety organization, not within our department, is to build a certain capability. And I mean, I think as per any organization, it will be a learning organization. Now, it won't be within...
There must be a list internally that you can quickly check off so that you don't have to go through all that. Like, this is like a make-work project for government. Like, the same entity repeatedly applies, you turn them down, they apply again. There's got to be a list of ones that you've declined then, right?
Again, that would be housed within sort of public safety
But
and research
currently-
security, but not within ISED. We don't have a direct role in reviewing the applications. Under the new process, there'd be a combination list of potential research-sensitive areas and institutions that would serve as a basis for rejection.
Couldn't we have a list that isn't publicly known, but behind the scenes it would exist, and that it would save thousands of dollars of taxpayers' dollars of bureaucratic waste, where the application comes in, it can be flagged, it'd be declined, they can appeal if they like, it doesn't have to be reported publicly on why we declined it, and we move on, versus setting up an application structure that is going to cost millions and millions of dollars, versus let's have that list, say no, and have a appeal process to potentially rule out some false negative people being on that list?
I think it's a valid point. I think part of what we're trying to achieve, where we've signaled that there would eventually be a list of sensitive technologies and sensitive researchers, would exactly be that, to create signals into the institutions. And so I don't think that we want to be a blunt instrument in saying in all instances, but I do think there is a signal to the community around institutions and sensitive technologies that will be refreshed and therefore create that signal to the system.
But I believe the Four Eyes have now looked at Canada and wanted us to be blunt.
I think we want to be direct and transparent, and yet still try to maximize the objective of open and
Was it being blunt, though, the Four Eyes? And this is probably above the scale, but when the Four Eyes banned wallways being blunt and Canada didn't, its bluntness is needed when dealing with the PRC and foreign entities. Would you agree with that?
I think we are striving to have an approach that is transparent and creates clear signals and balances a number of approaches.
So, could you provide a detailed list? We're talking about a lot of on list here, but of which ministries or ministers would have fingerprints on developing this list? Who would be which ministers would be
Okay, thank you.
tasked with, please?
And that answer could either list or say why we can or can't do that. But we have asked the question. So now we're going to go over, and I'm not trying to give the answer, over to Mr. Turnbull for six minutes, please.
Very much. Thanks, Chair, and thanks to the witnesses for being here. Appreciate the work that you do, and it's an important conversation. So, listen, I think we've heard questions from colleagues here today that sort of imply that this is, we should just ban research very broadly in a sweeping sort of way, and that there's this magical list that they're talking about and referring to as if that would make things crystal clear and easy. I think this work seems to be more nuanced than that. Can you explain how it's a lot more nuanced, that we have to really treat each research project on a case-by-case basis and do a thorough review and analysis of what security risks there may be attached to those specific projects?
And maybe a starting point for that is within the national research guidelines, we've identified some of our guiding principles, some of the things we're trying to weigh. Those include, obviously, academic freedom, institutional autonomy, freedom of expression, research in the public interest, integrity, collaboration, but also securing the research to build that trust. And so building a system, our attempt, or the attempt that in our approach, tries to balance these elements with protecting the research and the researchers. Nippon, I don't know if you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, those are important sort of signals because you, as the minister said, you want to be as open as possible and secure as necessary to be able to actually benefit from the exchange of ideas that enhances Canadian research. You also have to be mindful of the signals that are being sent to certain communities within the country. Like, this is not about Chinese Canadians. This is not about different groups. This is about the risks of specific research activities. And if you proceed in a sort of a way that isn't sort of sensitive to those nuances, you're potentially risking some unintended consequences with respect to.
Maybe I'll follow up on that. What would those unintended consequences look like? To me, they're research that could be highly beneficial to Canadian interests that would not move forward and inhibit our ability to get the most value out of those research projects. Would you agree with that? And, generally, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to the extent possible, you want to provide clear and transparent guidance, which I think is what we've been trying to do through the activities that we've been doing through a working group, through the guidelines, and ultimately through these lists. If you also want to be able to provide advice to the university so they can actually identify risk, because any list that you develop is not going to cover the full range of risks. So you need to have an ongoing dialogue with the research community, build that kind of trust with them in order to enable them to pursue those research partnerships that are going to be beneficial to Canada. So I think you do have to be careful how you proceed on these kinds of things.
Yeah. And I heard from the minister, which I was really happy to hear, that Canada, as it moves forward with its research security initiatives, that we would be building a robust research security ecosystem. The word ecosystem seems to me to be particularly important in this conversation. I know I did work on the Procedure and House Affairs Committee on Foreign Interference for many, many months. And heard just how important an all-of-government approach and an ecosystem approach, which covers more than just government, but actually other actors that are out there that are needed in order to make sure the security system is sufficiently robust. Can you speak to how that plays into this work that we're talking about today? Because I think it's really significant.
Yeah, well, I mean, as the minister mentioned, like there are many layers that need to be aligned in terms of how you move forward on this kind of work. You need to, the federal government, of course, provincial governments, institutions, researchers. They all need to understand the why, the what, and the how of it all. And so you do need all those actors. That requires a certain degree of engagement. You know, we've been in multiple fora talking to researchers directly. We've been talking to institutions directly, so that they have a better sense of the threat environment, but also to build trust that we rely on the research and the talent that comes out of that research for our future prosperity. So you have to kind of look at both sides of the coin when you look at these things.
Chair, how much time do I have? Oh, good, great. So we heard that out of 1,743 applications, I believe 36 were rejected due to security risks. Obviously, those applications only include the Tri-Council, I would think, because they're applications that within federal jurisdiction. So out of the 36 that were rejected, can you give me any sense of what kinds of things were rejected? Is there any sort of patterns or conclusions, generalizations that, without getting into specifics, because I know that would be sensitive, but is there any sort of conclusions that you can draw from those 36?
In 30 seconds.
In 30 seconds.
Well, overall, I could say quickly the presence of state-owned enterprise was one, and the presence of sensitive technologies, particularly in the digital space, were patterns that were recurring through those.
Expecting such a succinct answer.
Do I have more time then?
Well, we're at 10 seconds, so thank you for your questions. Mr. Blanchet-Jonca for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. And I thank the witnesses for remaining with us for this second hour. Now, the government has mentioned this infamous list. We've been talking about it for an hour. We won't get it today. We've got that clear. But there's something else that the government should clarify is what is a sensitive research area, sensitive area of research. That should be done by now. So I'd like to know whether the witnesses now could tell us whether this has been done and whether this information has been shared. Within the initial guidelines, certain areas of sensitive research were identified. And then, of course, that has been refined. And in the next list, we'll come out with this new policy. So the guide that's being written up since February, can we find in there the actual areas of sensitive research? There are indications of sensitive areas, such as those where technology might be used for military purposes or might ill affect our ability to export. Okay, so we're moving forward on all of this as a package. But a number of witnesses have come before us to say that, yes, there are some clarifications, there are some guidelines, there are some criteria to respect, and of course, we're all still waiting for the list, but people apply for funding, their applications are turned down, but they don't get an explanation of why. And here we are, the triumph, Mr. Nigel Smith has said that the threats and the nature of potential threats, security threats, should be stated more clearly so that we know what we're dealing with. And then we have another researcher who's the Director General of the Association of University Professors, saying that people don't know why their applications are being turned down. Representatives of the U15 have made 45 NSERC requests, and 34 have been turned down. They asked for answers as to why, but they didn't get them. So basically, scientists don't know what they're doing wrong, and the government isn't really telling them what they need to improve in order to succeed in their next request. In the process, there is follow-up with the researchers provided for. So I don't know these specific cases, but I would be happy to look at them in greater detail. and follow up with you, but generally speaking, there should be follow-up. So what's been done? Are there new procedures, new measures that are being planned for in order to ensure that these people get clear responses? As I said, in the procedure and the way that this should be carried out for these 36, the process does create this obligation to provide feedback, not sharing sensitive information, of course, but there should be an ability to provide follow-up. That is written into the process and the procedure. All right, okay. And, of course, national security and research, this is of great importance. But another topic, the Bouchard report, which was basically set up by the committee that we have here, the Federal Committee on Support to Research. I haven't had a chance to hear from your department yet on this. There was a calendar laid out with specific actions to be taken within the year 2023, specifically to set up the Canadian Fund for Knowledge and Science and to improve funding to the tri-councils and, of course, render our grants to graduate students competitive. Is there anything you can tell us about all that today? I won't be able to tell you exactly when all those decisions were taken. If you're looking for a calendar, these are important recommendations, though, of course, made by the Bouchard Commission, but I can't give you an actual calendar as to when measures would be taken following up on those recommendations. Okay, let's be clear. There are 21 recommendations in this Bouchard report, and your government asked for this report in order to help ensure that the scientific ecosystem remain competitive at the international level. So I'd like to know what recommendations have been made use of and what have you followed up on since this was published? I can say that the recommendations in Mr. Bouchard's report are rather vast and they cover a lot. They're linked, and it's both important and complex to actually take action on any single one of those recommendations without first laying out guidelines for the entire ecosystem. So that's what we're working on. We are working on how to integrate all of this into an overall plan. If you just take specific recommendations, could you share in writing a follow-up regarding these recommendations? Action taken, action not taken, action planned, where are you at? I'd appreciate that. So far, as I said, we have not provided specific measures following up on any of these recommendations per se. So nothing. But as I say, the entirety of those recommendations, which make for a complex ecosystem, has to be thought out within an overall set of guidelines.
Reporting back on the Bouchard, but now we'll go to Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes.
I'm just asking for a written answer. I just want to make sure that that's heard, yes? Yes, we can certainly provide you with a written answer. Thank you.
Answer could be about the review period if you're not able to give the specific details asked in the question. Mr. Cannings?
Thank you. And I'm just, we've heard a lot about the research ecosystem, et cetera. Here, I'm just wondering, and this may have come up previously in this study, so my apologies if you or other people have answered this question. And that is, what's the percentage of research funding, say, in universities across Canada that is provided by, I imagine it's mainly through the tri-councils, but do you have, just so that we can... He's got some pie charts there, I see.
Do you know these better than I do? Yeah, I actually think I would like to be very accurate when we respond to you in terms of the funding. We can definitely provide you a breakdown of federal funding by federal, provincial, and other
I'm just, I think it's important because we're talking about, research in universities and risks for national security, and one of the few sticks we keep hearing about is, pulling funding from research projects that we consider too risky to fund, too risky for national security. But if it's only a small, federal funding is only a small part of that funding, then it seems to me that there's other sources that researchers at universities could go to, and sometimes they're perhaps funding sources we would rather they not go to. That's all.
So I will say that when it comes to sort of the research in post-secondary around PhDs, we are the federal government is a significant contributor, but maybe Nipin.
I mean, I think to your more general point about the reach of our actions, like I think it's true that there is a lot of research that goes on that isn't funded through federal grants, but I think it's the prohibitions on federal grants. They do solve some of the problem. They also send a very clear signal to the research community on where the security concerns are. But we also have, as the minister mentioned, the Research Security Center, and the funding that we've provided institutions has allowed a lot of institutions to actually hire a director of research security. So there's a natural point of contact between the security agencies who can help to identify risks and someone who's responsible for managing those risks at institutions. So it is true that you're not solving the whole problem through prohibitions on federal funding, but there are other layers that have been implemented to try and address those broader risks.
And so are the security agencies then relying on the universities to bring issues to their attention, or do they have some direct oversight?
Well, I wouldn't call it oversight because there's not like a jurisdictional kind of accountability. If there's a security threat, then the security agencies would act on that threat. If there is a concern about risks, there would be a discussion, there'd be information shared with institutions where appropriate, where it doesn't sort of compromise our security interests. But it also is developing a relationship with institutions, whereas they have questions or concerns, they have a place to go, a trusted source of expertise and advice that they can use to better mitigate risks on their own campuses. So,
but if the security agency finds there's a risk, how do they find out about that, or is it through?
You might have to ask them, but I'm not sure they'd be able to tell you. I mean, there can be cases where with this center in place and with an improved security posture on campuses, someone may come to them and say, is this kind of transaction or behavior something that we should be concerned about or not? And they could provide some advice on that. But I think you have to be a little careful. One of the advantages of having that kind of a relationship is that you don't see. You're not sending the wrong kind of signals to researchers, right? I mean, I think having a focal point within an institution that can manage those risks actually means that you're not getting concerns from individual researchers about security agencies just kind of scattershot around. Yeah. So I think it is about a relationship.
Right. I mean, okay, just I think this is important because we're talking about national security here, which is a federal thing. We're talking about universities which have a provincial jurisdiction. We have federal funding, so there's all these intersections. But I sort of have the feeling that there's an awful lot of opportunity for researchers to go beyond NSERC or the other tri-councils to get that funding, and that's where I think the real risk lies, where they're lured to take funding from agencies abroad that may or may not have the best interests of Canada in mind.
Well, I think, take your point, and I think part of that has informed the approach today. Part of that has to, from our perspective, has had to be about building the tools and capacity across multiple actors. That's why, for example, there was the new research support fund put in place to build up capacity. And Nipin mentioned that multiple universities are now creating positions within their organizations around research security. That's why we've focused on providing out guidance and building tools that can then be used by multiple actors. Also building a common understanding of the threats and building at the same time capacity within the Government of Canada through the Research Security Centre. So I think your point on there are multiple potential vectors, and so we need to enable and support multiple actors in the ecosystem to be able to take a proactive position is the right one.
Thank you.
And if I might just extend that a little bit, I've met with a couple of universities myself in my role, as well as some of the U15 German universities, and they've hired security people from the national security agencies in both cases. They were saying they're looking at threat bases versus country bases. I think that's an important distinction for the report that we're writing, which is focused on China. Any very, very brief comments, since I'm taking a little bit of committee time here?
Well, I think our approach has also been around threat basis, and that threat basis has a number of factors. And so they include the areas of research, they include the nature of the actors, and we recognize as well that threat levels will and nature of threats will evolve, and so will those vectors. And so part of the approach has included one around education, one around building in dialogue, building in the groups that are able to exchange, and building in capacity across multiple. So not to box ourselves into individual organizations, individual countries, recognizing that those threats evolve, and that to be able to respond, we need an ecosystem that is better capable and educated to respond to them.
Great. Thank you very much. And thanks to the committee for indulging my prerogative there. Mr. Perkins, over to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So along the lines of what the chair asked, so the preference seems to be to continue with some sort of flexible guidelines. Is that right?
The guidelines will become, the upcoming guidelines will include a list of institutions and a list of sensitive technologies, so much more precise, but the capacity to evolve them over time.
But they're still guidelines, they're not law. So, and my skepticism, of course, is that I'll give you a couple of examples through Investment Canada and a few other instances where the Minister of Industry in 2017 didn't perform a detailed a national security review of the takeover of Norsat by Hytera. That company then went on in January 2022, Hytera, to be banned by President Biden and charged with 21 counts of espionage, yet we still had nothing in the industry department about this company, to the point that the RCMP, 9 months later, bought sensitive communications equipment from Hytera while they're banned and charged with espionage in the United States. And then in November 2022, the current Liberal minister ordered 3 Chinese companies to divest their ownership of 3 critical minerals companies. But only 3 months later, in January, Minister Champagne failed to follow his own guidelines when he fast-tracked the takeover of a Canadian lithium company by Neo Lithium Corp, a Chinese state-owned mining enterprise. And that's where he's got the law. So does the minister have the power and law now, in existing legislation, to ban companies from doing business in Canada as they do in the United States?
Well, the ICA is a basis of law, and that would create a power for the minister to prevent investments and acquisitions. This is not sort of the space we're talking about right now. Obviously, the space of research is one that is multi-jurisdictional, and so the approach that we have, or that is being presented as this one, is one around guidelines and anchored in the major lever the federal has, which is funding for research.
Okay, so guidelines with no legal teeth. So a question, the minister has said when he made the announcements on research funding that he didn't control what provinces or universities did beyond sort of the granting councils. Has the minister convened a meeting of his provincial counterparts to share with them that they need to stop doing this?
Sorry, there has been communication with his counterparts about the policy. So he sent out communication to them. We've also had meetings at officials levels to discuss how we could ensure alignment of policies across the federal and provincial governments.
But he's not told them to stop doing research with Huawei, with the Chinese military arm national research. He's not told the provinces directly to stop doing that? and ask the provinces to tell the universities, which they fund and are primarily control, to actually implement that?
Well, I mean,
Well, so in February, the Minister of ISED, Public Safety and Health Canada did issue a policy statement which asked the granting councils, the RLEVR, not to fund any funding where there would be a researcher that could be influenced or affiliated with areas of concern, so state-owned enterprises or potentially influenced by military or other state actors, and sensitive research. So the minister has provided guidance in that space.
So I understand that he's done that with the granting councils, but is he told and brought his provincial counterparts together who are responsible for transfers of money to universities and asked them to respect those national guidelines and not do business with these entities?
He's called upon them to respond in kind. Yes, I mean,
what's respond in kind mean? Sorry.
Well, I mean, he's pointed to the federal policy and said, provinces should move forward with similar actions.
And are they?
It varies by jurisdiction.
Can you provide a report to this committee of what jurisdictions are following them and what aren't?
Well, we could give you a report on what they're doing.
Sure.
And, yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Cooper?
I guess we have some follow-up there, so thank you for that, for the questions. And now we'll go to Mr. Lametti for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Merci aux experts d'être ici avec nous aujourd'hui. C'est très important.
Thank you for the experts for being with us here today. It's very important to have you with us. And I add my voice to those of Mr. Blanchette-Jonca and Mr. Cannings. I was myself a researcher for about 20 years in a university. I understand the pressure on academics to look for grants in order to carry out research, also in order to be able to retain the services and ensure the education of students, graduate students. Now, I understand that if you're turned down by NSERC, let's say you go elsewhere for funding, there is that continuous pressure. So we need, above all else, to provide better funding to our researchers through our programming here in Canada. So our scientists trained, our researchers trained in the identification of risks. Obviously, this is something that they need to do with the RCMP and so on. And yes, some universities do have security officers, but is there now a requirement that researchers be trained, or at least enough so that they can dialogue on this? To the best of my knowledge, there is no training imposed. There is training material that has been created, even a website that's been struck up by the federal government, and tools that are offered by the federal government to support this knowledge. There's also funding provided to universities to help them build their capacity in this area, but it's not mandatory, right? Yes, it's not mandatory, at least from the Fed level, but there are universities who have made use of our tools, our courses, which are available online, our course material online, and have, presented them to their professors and their researchers, and even made it mandatory for them from the university point of view. Our aim then and our approach is to provide tools to the university milieu. And what is mandatory is the review that goes through the tri-councils. Thank you. Now, for universities that have security officers, is that helpful for them? And does this work? Could those persons be better supported by the federal government to ensure that they'll be able to, help train their milieu? That's an excellent question. There's no doubt that there would be a possibility of doing more there. I think that all this is still quite new, what the federal government is up to, in particular, the funding that is provided to the universities, that is provided to support their efforts to enhance research security. But no doubt, as we proceed and as we learn as we go, we'll see where we can do more. Thank you. Could it be that one of the problems is the ability to appeal a decision to refuse to fund a project or to exclude a specific player from a group project? I know that that sort of thing exists for investments, this ability to appeal a refusal before a tribunal. I'm not sure if such a procedure, even exists within NSERC. Is there somewhere you can appeal a decision to? I just want to be aware. I stand to be corrected, but I don't think there's an appeal process, any sort of tribunal or review, secondary review. These systems, however, that distribute funds are quite rigorous, and you're probably more aware of that as I am. There, of course, is peer review. There are specific procedures that are created and respected by the tri-councils. Thank you so much. I didn't know per se, so thank you so much for that information.
Je vais donner mes 10 secondes à quelqu'un d'autre.
Very well. I'll turn that 10 seconds over to somewhere else.
Didn't finish. Mr. Blanchet-Choca for 2.5.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. Let's pick up on with Mr. Bilodeau. Thank you for being here. Now, in the committee, we put out some very important work, new approaches to scientific research in Canada, 17 recommendations that were suggested by testimonies to really put an end to the death of French language science research in Canada, really, the slow death. So, good principles. But I'd like to hear exactly what the federal government has done to support French in research since that report came out, and what have you been doing recently? I think there is a situation as follows. The situation is as follows. Through the funding granting agencies, there is funding specifically earmarked to advance research in French. Moreover, it's clear that the review panels are always bilingual, and that is indeed the approach that's respected by the 3 granting agencies. Moreover, results for researchers in French are higher, basically, than the average when it comes to getting the funding. And the number of applications is another figure. This is something we're looking at more closely. It's a little more difficult to track across all the provinces and territories. Mr. Bilodeau, a few facts for you. There is a high proportion of funding for research, mostly in English. According to a Radio-Canada article, Christian Noël, last May, 85% of the funding of the tri-councils for over a 3-year period ending in 2021 are granted for research in English. That's 95%. And I can read this for you. This is in the report to the government's response regarding linguistic competencies and abilities of the evaluators, the peers in these committees. These are self-evaluations that they turn in, and the suggestion is to add a test so that we can actually test them. These are volunteers. We have people there who can't even read a research request in French, and sometimes because there aren't people stepping forward to do it. This is millions of dollars, scientific research. The government isn't even taking into consideration that the people who are carrying out the evaluations, the peers you've mentioned, are able to speak both languages.
Je pense que nos attentes sont que
I think our expectations are that people who read research projects be able to do so in French if they have identified as bilingual.
Well, thank you. And I guess I just want to get back to the funding and the recommendations. For instance, in the Bouchard report, you were saying how, I'm not sure if the report was vast or the ecosystem is vast or whatever. I know, as an ecologist, I know ecosystems can be complicated, but it strikes me that there are parts of that report that are so obviously correct and good advice that they could be acted on immediately. And one of them is, what we've been mentioning here multiple times in this committee, and that is making sure those fellowships and scholarships are boosted so that, they haven't been increased for 20 years. We have our best graduate students living in poverty. Surely that's low-hanging fruit that this government should change. And I'm just wondering what efforts ISED have made to impress upon, whether it's the Minister of Finance or any part of cabinet outside of ISED, that this is something that really should be done as a very much a preliminary first step. If we do anything, we have to do this.
obviously difficult for me to tell you what or not we've provided for advice. What I can tell you is we've tracked very carefully the funding levels. We're very aware of sort of historical current funding levels and those of our partners. That is something that we do analysis on and that we understand. And we welcome and work with Mr. Bouchard and the members of that committee as they were formulating their advice, and had the opportunity to benefit from a number of discussions with them and others who have made representations, some in the sense of what you're providing.
Mm-hmm. And when you say partners, you said, and those of our partners, what do you mean by partners?
Well, we've engaged with universities, we've engaged with right. provinces and others to understand sort of the funding realities in that ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And so it's the dynamics around the funding realities for students, for researchers, et cetera, is one that we pay attention to, that we do analysis on, and that we do share information about with the public and with ministers.
Okay, thank you. Now we've got two more sets. Mr. Cooper for 5 minutes, and we'll go to Ms. Bradford for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 8 years ago, the U.S. administration blacklisted Beijing's National University of Defense Technology, which reports directly to the Beijing-based Communist Party's Central Military Commission on the basis that it posed a national security threat. 8 years later, and 3 administrations later, the NUDT remains blacklisted by the United States. Incredibly, the minister in the last hour was oblivious to that blacklisting on the part of the United States, despite the fact that Canadian universities are collaborating with the NUDT, as well as granting councils that fall under his purview have provided funding out of taxpayers' dollars to projects involved in the NUDT to the benefit of Beijing. Can the officials confirm that that the minister has the power to issue a ministerial directive to block federal funding to projects involving Beijing's NUDT? The minister has that power, correct?
So do you want to go first?
Does the minister have the capacity to block or to direct the councils not to fund funding specific to an institution? That is what will be done partly through the directives. So he has the power. Now, maybe I'll pause there.
He does have that power, yes. Thank you very much. And he has not exercised that power, has he?
At present, the minister has issued guidelines to universities and to the research councils around considerations that are not institutional specific. The new guidelines will include a list of institutions.
And thank you for that. And so those guidelines do not mention the NUDT, they do not mention the CCP, they do not mention the PLA, correct?
Guidelines at present are not specific to countries or not specific to institutions.
And 9 months later, we're still waiting for the list of entities that he promised that he would deliver expeditiously back in February. And he says it's going to come soon. I don't know what soon is by this minister's definition. But can you clarify, through you, Mr. Chair, that consequently, there is no prohibition, nothing expressly in place to block granting councils that fall under the minister's purview from funding or otherwise supporting projects that are working in collaboration with the NUDT, which reports directly to Beijing's People's Liberation Army.
Current guidelines would preclude funding to a research project in a sensitive area and in areas where there's reason to believe that national security could be in place.
What's a sensitive area?
Some of them have been defined in the guidance, in Annex A of the existing guidance. Those would include areas, for example, potentially around nuclear or around areas of weapons building or around areas of dual use that could be transferred, that could result. It would also include areas, for example, where personal information could be at play.
And yet we know that despite those guidelines, as I reminded the minister, we have patents that have been issued to Huawei that involve Canadian researchers specifically in relation to 5G, which is one of the 5 areas that have been identified by CSIS as areas of sensitivity involving research. So it underscores that those guidelines have no teeth and are simply not working.
Mind if I just respond to that? I mean, I think it's just when you talk about specifically patents, I think it's important to appreciate that the time between the research activity and the filing of a patent can be quite long. So in some, I mean, I don't know the specifics of these cases, but in some cases you could be talking research that was done 10 years ago that's resulting in patents today. So I mean, I think you have to look at the specific case.
Sir, I take your point, but I think you've clarified that the minister has tools at his disposal to block the funding of taxpayers' dollars to entities such as the NUDT connected directly to Beijing's People's Liberation Army, and he has failed to use those tools at his disposal, undermining Canada's national security in the face of very serious interference by the Beijing regime, which he refused to acknowledge is existential to Canada.
Mr. Chair, can I just make a quick comment, if I may? I mean,
we're over time. Okay. I think we've gone through this before, and we're going to go over to Ms. Bradford for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Can you talk to the committee about the NSERC Alliance program and the results from the pilot so far?
So the NSERC Alliance program is the main vehicle for partnerships between Canadian researchers and companies. There can be other partners on those grants as well, but it's largely partnerships with companies. The funding goes to the researcher in each case, not to the company. And it was the first program that enacted the current guidelines on research partnerships, so the ones that have been in place since July of 2021. In that case, the way the process works, as we discussed a little earlier, is that there's a questionnaire that's filled out by the researcher that's endorsed by the institution. NSERC staff who've been kind of trained to identify where there could be security risks will then assess whether that needs to be brought forward for further assessment by the security agencies. An important aspect of that is that the merit review of the research and the security review are separated, so that you are not kind of conflating the quality of the research and the security risk, because there'd be a concern on the part of the researchers that the two are tied rather than research being assessed on its merits. So in that program during the pilot phase, which went from July 2021 to July 2022, there were about 96% of those applications that were submitted that were validated as not needing to have a research security assessment. And then, in that period, there were 48 out of 1,158 that were brought forward for further security assessment. So a very small number of them went to the security agencies, and then of those, I believe about 36 were actually denied funding. It's done in a way that it also tries to protect the privacy of the information that's shared. So it also involves agreements between NSERC and the security agencies on how that information can be used, sort of to protect the integrity of the research and the process. But it has actually been a pretty positive kind of effort. It's now kind of been expanded beyond the Alliance program to biomedical research programs, and it's expected that it'll be rolled out across a broader range of programs over time.
So can you elaborate on the process that the researcher goes through when a national security threat has been flagged with a proposed research topic? How does that happen?
Yeah, so the way it works is that if NSERC identifies a potential risk, that information is provided to the Department of Public Safety. The Department of Public Safety then either conducts its internal assessment, or if it feels it needs more specific security analysis, it would go to, depending on the nature of the issue, it would go either to CSIS or it would go to the Communications Security Establishment if it's sort of signals related kind of information, and then that assessment goes back to Public Safety, who then conveys the relevant information back to NSERC within the scope of their policies.
Okay, and can you tell us how we work with allied countries to share information on mutual national security threats? What's the process in place for that?
Well, there's a broader dialogue on security threats that goes through the security agencies themselves. In our case, we're involved in a number of dialogues, both Five Eyes and G7, for example, on research security specific issues. So there's a Five Eyes table, there's a G7 table which we co-chair with the UK on research integrity and research security to make sure that there's, to the extent possible, consistency in approaches and a sharing of information and best practices. But when it comes to security related information, that will go through the security agencies specifically.
Okay, great. And now, education does fall under provincial jurisdiction, so obviously it's difficult for the federal government to tell them what they can and can't do. I'm just wondering how the provinces collaborate with the federal government on research security.
About 30 seconds.
Well, we have a dialogue with provinces at officials levels to talk about our policies and how they do or don't align currently with provinces, with the intention of trying to make them align as much as possible. Then there's also the institutional layer. So at the institutional level, we have a working group with universities. We have the Research Security Center, which works directly with universities, and also would liaise with provincial governments. So there are different channels for that kind of engagement.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for your questions, but especially thank you to Mr. Vatz and Mr. Bilodeau for being here and giving us such great answers for our report on the security study that we're doing, and any additional information. I know I had to cut you off a couple of times that can come to the clerk. That'll help with our study. We have our last meeting on the study on Wednesday, November 22nd, and at that study we'll have Director Vigneault from CSIS, as well as some supporting department officials. And then we have the second hour of the meeting, we'll be looking at drafting instructions for this report. And we'll also do version 3 of scholarships and fellowships, so that we can maybe hopefully table that. Tomorrow I'll be tabling the IP report in the House. So with that, if there's a motion to adjourn, it looks like people are doing that. Thanks, Richard. Thank you again.